Hey everyone, Card Cafe here, bringing you some more set 12 goodness. Moving right down the line here with more decks I've been waiting here to talk about until set 12 dropped, because I knew we were getting some really cool cards in it. And the next one is Bavsargra. This is my second favorite Dragon Empire ride line after Nirvana. Nirvana will always be number one, but Bavsargra is number two. Just a really cool deck. It has a unique mechanic that we'll talk about. And just also looks really cool. Like, look at that. Look how cool she looks. The Blaze Dragon, Blue Fire, like, such a cool card. And keeps that aesthetic with the rest of her ride line right here. So, let's get into it. Grade 1, as always, is just your when wrote upon going second, draw a card, straightforward to the point. But grade 1 says, Vanguard from writing from this card, Soul Blast 1, search your deck for either the sword or the shield arm. I'm not going to try and say their names, just the sword or the shield arms order, which we'll go over in a little bit, what those are and what they do. But it's an order card, essentially. Search for one of those two orders, put it into your hand, shuffle your deck. So great, just a good consistency to look for a very specific piece that we'll need. And then also if it attacks, it gets 2,000 power. So that skill doesn't ever come up, really. If you're having this in the front row, you're in a pretty bad spot. Well, what it's here for is the Soul Blast on ride. Search your deck for the sword or the shield, add it to your hand. Then our grade 2 over here says, when he's placed on Vanguard, you get to take a arms order from your drop zone, put it right back into your hand. So really great for just, you discard the order that you just searched with this for your ride line skill. And then when you ride into this, you just put it right back into your hand. So we like that a lot, basically a free ride up into grade 2. But let's talk about Bavsargra herself. Still a start deck card, technically. She never got an upgrade. She never got a grade 4. She never got a grade 3 mask or just an alternate grade 3 form. We're still just rocking the start deck version because that's what we got. But she's still pretty good, because what she says is, when this unit is armed with the arms order card, you can soul charge 1, and then you choose a grade 1 or less card from your drop zone and call it your rear guard. So good thing of just building up soul, which matters for her other skill, and then also just letting you recur grade 1 and less cards from the drop zone. Some very specific ones that we'll talk about in a little bit. But so good for building a board and building your soul for the second skill, which is act once per turn. If you have 2 arms cards on her, you can Soul Blast 2, retire your opponent's front row, and she gets a crit. So really good, just consistent wiping out your opponent's front row, and it's not choose. Very important. You're not targeting a specific unit there. It is just Soul Blast 2, retire all your opponent's front row. So anything that is protected against from being chosen by opponent's card effects are not protected by this skill. Looking at Bastion, that's the big one right now. Its front row is not protected from this skill. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't retire their rear guards from Bavsargra's skill. She does wipe their front row because she is not targeting their front row. Or she's not targeting the specific units in the front row. She is targeting the front row itself. Just saying all those rear guards are dead. So good kind of anti-meta call there in terms of just what she does and be able to consistently do that. And then the crit is nice just for the pressure, because she can get pretty big, as we'll talk about. And just consistently having the crit to swing is nice. The soul, keeping up the Soul Blast 2 is not hard, because like you said, she soul charges 1 just for her own skill every time you arm, and then there's other ways of building soul in the deck. So a solid, consistent card. A little outdated, but still pretty good. Next, as far as just the rest of her, we are doing just obviously 3 more for the Persona ride. No Grail in this deck, partially because there's no room. And then also because it's also technically a normal order, so it conflicts with the arms orders a little bit, because those are also technically normal units, and technically you can only play one from your hand. So if you have to use the Grail to Persona Ride, you can't play a arms order from your hand. So keep that in mind if you are trying to run the Grail. It's a little bit of a conflict there. There are obviously ways in this deck that we'll talk about to get around and arming up your Vanguard that don't require you just doing the normal arming from hand by playing an order, but still you could run into that to being an issue. So we just run 3 copies of her and no Grail. But all right, we've talked about it enough. I've kind of mentioned it a few times. What are the arms orders? So the arms orders are a really cool version of normal orders, like I said. We'll start with the first one we mentioned, which is the shield. So this is specifically a left arm order. What it means is that it goes on Bavsargra's left side. And it only can go on her left side. You can't arm her, put it here. But it works like a normal order where you play it for the turn, and instead of it going to like an order zone or something and going to your drop zone, it just attaches to Bavsargra. Think of it like equipment from Magic the Gathering, if you played that, where it's you're equipping this to her, and she just permanently now has this unless you remove it by playing something else. And what the shield says is that you have to counterblast 1 as the paying the cost if you're arming this from hand. Only from hand, by the way, which matters for other skills. But if you're doing just the regular, I'm playing this from my hand as an order to arm, you have to pay counterblast 1. It gets armed to her left side, and then it says during your opponent's turn, once per turn, you give Bavsargra 10,000 power. So this is just a free 10k shield, essentially, once per turn. Your opponent's sitting at you for like 18, 20k. You just say, okay, I activate the arms skill, and you get 10,000 power to just stop that attack. So the shield is really good and something you want to always make sure is on Bavsargra at the end of your turn, which we'll talk about that a little bit more later too. Well, that's how it works. It's a normal order. You equip it to her, and then it gives her a skill depending on the situation. And that's also, this is the one you're always going to search off of the grade 1 ride line. Spoilers, we don't run the sword. Because there's no room, the sword's kinda, yeah. Next is we run 3 copies of the spear arm unit. Now this is a right arm, so it goes on Bavsargra's right side. Now the spear is really good. What the spear says is that it's also to equip it if you're playing it just normally from your hand, counterblast 1, and then you get to immediately draw a card. Once this is equipped to your Vanguard, just draw 1. So really good plussing, and that is regardless of where you're playing it, by the way. Not to kind of confuse what I just said there. It's not counterblast 1, arm it, draw a card. It's counterblast 1 to arm this from your hand, and then separately, when this is armed to your Vanguard, draw a card. Which again, matters when we talk about other ways to arm to your Vanguard other than from hand. And then what's really good is that also, when it's armed to your Vanguard, it gives you the skill that you can play another arm that turn. Because normally you can only play 1 order per turn. This gets around that. This says you can play another order this turn from your hand. So usually what you'll do at the beginning of the game, depending on your situation when you're first arming up on grade 3 turn, is you'll arm this first, counterblast 1, draw a card, and then now you have the skill, I can play another order, so you'll arm up with the shield. And then he also says, on attack, your Vanguard gets 10,000 power. So Bavsargra just automatically becomes 23 when attacking, just because this gives her 23, or gives her 10,000 power, excuse me. So just a real all-around really strong arm order. It's drawing you a card. It's allowing you to arm a second time in the turn, which is really important because you really need to make sure you're double armed and have both on your first grade 3 turn. Otherwise, you're just losing so much pressure and advantage. So make sure the 2/2, and then is also just making Bavsargra hit bigger numbers. So she's 23 with a crit by herself if you used her skill. So 3 copies of that. Now, the last arm we're running is the new card from set 12, the Axe. So this is another left arm. So this goes in the same spot as the shield, where things get a little kind of tricky. You just got to make sure you're playing things correctly and doing your skills at the appropriate times. So this is free to arm. So when you're just arming this onto Bavsargra's left side, it doesn't cost anything. It's free, which is nice. But it comes in later. What this says is pretty simple. It's just when your Vanguard attacks your opponent's Vanguard, they have to call 2 cards to guard. So it's one of those classic guard restricts in Overdress where they have to call 2 cards to guard, which is really great for Bavsargra because she has the crit. So they're always going to want to perfect guard this usually, especially because she gets really big, depending on the situation and other cards we'll talk about. So this is just making it so they have to pay more to perfect guard her, which they always want to do. So giving her that guard restrict is excellent, and why we run 3 copies of this and why you want this on offense. Now, why this doesn't conflict with the shield too heavily is its second skill, which is at the end of the turn, not the end of the battle, end of the turn. I've messed that up a couple times. It's end of the turn, you counterblast 1, this on Vanguard goes to drop, and you get to pick a shield, or really actually just technically any left arm arms card from your drop zone and put it back onto your Vanguard as armed. So this is how you just end the turn with shield, is you'll equip the axe onto Bavsargra, end of the turn, counterblast 1, this gets removed, and you just take the shield from your drop zone and just put it back onto your Vanguard. You just have to make sure that this is in your drop zone, which can be sometimes a little tricky depending on your setup and what you're doing, but it's not too bad. But that's just the loop that you're gonna do, is on offense, equip this to your Vanguard, end of turn, goes away, equip this end of turn for defense. So really good card, gives that pressure to your Vanguard, and then just also solves the problem this deck had before, which was you never wanted to left arm equip anything that wasn't the shield because you wanted that 10k for your opponent's turn. So this gives you best of both worlds. 3 copies. Now we're only running 3 copies of these really good orders like the spear and the axe because we have this crazy good grade 2. That's also new from set 12. Now, what Steel Blaze Dragon de Visalia, something like that says, they have 2 skills. The first one is the important one, which is when placed on rear guard, you Soul Blast 1, look at 7 cards from the top of your deck. You choose 1 card with the Dress Boost ability, and you choose 1 arms card. You pick 1 of them to go to your hand, and 1 goes to the drop. So there's just a huge consistency buff for the deck. Check in top 7 for any arms card that you're looking for, put it into your hand, put it in the drop zone, and the Dress Boost cards that we'll talk about later. And whatever one you need, again, put it in the drop if you need it to be in the drop, or in your hand if you need it to be in your hand. So just huge. We love consistency boosts here just to search for the pieces that you need and give us a little bit of wiggle room to not have to run 3 of the axe or run 4 of the axe or 4 of the spear. And its second skill is pretty simple. When he attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, if your Vanguard is armed with 2 arms, so you do have to have the double arm like we were talking about, this just is 10,000 power. So strong beater 2, it's going to be at least 20,000 power by itself, 30,000 on Persona right turn, potentially bigger depending on your setup. So just really strong card. We love a beater that also is a consistency bump. Definitely 4 copies. And then lastly, for our grade 2s, we got the Sealed Blaze Dragon Kansari. I think this is, again, how you say that. These are hard names, man. 3 copies of this card, which is also a pretty good card. What this says, again, we got 2 skills going on. The first is another good consistency bump. What this card says is once placed on rear guard from hand specifically, if you have a Vanguard with Bavsargra in its name specifically. So this one has to wait until you're at grade 3, whereas this one doesn't, which is one of the main reasons why this is at 4 and this is at 3. But if you have a Bavsargra or Vanguard, you Soul Blast 1 and discard a card, and you get to search your deck, just the whole deck, not top 7, just search your deck for an arms card, put into your hand, shuffle your deck. So really good, just another consistency bump to be able to just search whatever you're looking for. It is a discard one, which is a little annoying, but that sometimes is a good thing depending on what you're looking to do. There are some things you want in the drop zone. So not a huge deal, but why we only run 3 as well, aside from requiring you to be on Bavsargra, is that it also is a discard card, which kind of hurts. And that second skill, though, is interesting. What it says is act once per turn, you counterblast 1, you put one of the arms equipped to your Vanguard into the soul, and draw a card. And then this gets 5,000 power for the turn. So, interesting skill. There's definitely instances where you'll find where you want to put the armed card on your Vanguard into your soul, either to fuel the soul or to open that spot up, to just equip something else there. Because if you don't, the thing that you had equipped will just get thrown to the drop zone if you equip something new. So this allows you to exchange it for a soul, and more importantly, a draw card, which is really important. There's not a whole lot of plussing this deck does, aside from just this straight skill and the spear. So we like that. It also just works like we were talking about with that skill with the shield, where you can, if you have the shield equipped, use this, counterblast 1, put the shield into your soul, equip the axe, then use Bavsargra or some other soul blast skill, get the shield out of your soul into the drop zone, end of turn, counterblast 1, swap back to the shield. So it's a good way of using this draw skill while also feeding up that spot. So 3 copies of that. Now, the main cards of this deck, the dress boosts that we referenced. Got 2 different cards to talk about. The first one is the more important one, honestly. The one, the only, the Trick Moon, the edgy Trick Star, the dark version of my boy Trick Star in Nirvana. So, this is a really good card. It's a grade 0, but we're talking about in the grade 1 section because it's relevant for another grade 1 we'll talk about in a second. But this is also just your primary card in your back row, at least to start. What he says is, when he's placed in your back row, center, rear guard specifically, from your drop zone, you countercharge 1. So this is your primary target for Bavsargra. You're going to use Bavsargra's skill to soul charge 1 and call a grade 1 or less to the back row. For her skill, you're looking for this. You hopefully have this in your drop zone specifically, so this is a really good target for your grade 1, or excuse me, for the grade 2. That looks at top 7 and puts 1 in hand, 1 in drop. This is what you're looking to put in the drop zone, because then use your Bavsargra and it counter charges 1. This is your only counter charge, so you want to make sure you're doing that. But its other skill is the dress boost skill, which is when this unit boosts, and when this unit boosts, this boosted unit gets 10,000 power until the end of the battle for each card your Bavsargra has armed. So basically, it's a 25k booster if your Bavsargra is double armed. If you have a right and left arm, 25k booster. So this is where your numbers kind of get crazy in this deck, especially behind Bavsargra. If Bavsargra's got the spear and this is at least 48, if not 58 on a percent ride turn, with a crit, with a guard restrict. So we love that for the numbers, for the counter charges. It's just a really, really good card, and you have to run forward this. There's no negotiating there. But where there is some negotiating room, and where I only run 3, is the new card, actually. Veil Lord, the overdress, I guess, basically, version for Trick Moon. The Verena to Trick Star version here, but still on that dark blue edgy side that we just love to see. Which is, yeah, first off, he is just an overdress on Trick Moon, where if you have Trick Moon on the rear guard circle, you just place him over it, and Trick Moon doesn't go to the drop zone. He's just in this stack now, which is kind of funny that this is in this deck, but here we are. And we got a couple skills here. The first is that, ironically, considering the deck it's in, this then has, if it's in the overdress state with Trick Moon, this cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects. They can't retire it, they can't bind it, whatever they would do to target this card, they can't do it. Which, you know, cool. We love that. Just for bit of protection so this card can't be removed. And then its second skill is when it's placed into the Overdress ability, you can counterblast 1, and you get to choose up to 2 arm units from your hand or drop. You put 1 onto the arm, you arm one of them, and 1 goes to soul. So this is one of the other ways to arm without playing them from hand and without relying on the spear's skill to do it, where you can overdress this, counterblast 1, and play a second card from either your hand or from your drop zone, and it just goes onto your Vanguard. So another one of those instances where if you pick the spear as the thing that you're arming onto your Vanguard, you'll just get the draw and you don't have to pay a counterblast for it, which is cool. So like that, just another way to get arms onto your Vanguard, again, without relying on the spear skill. And then its final skill, though, which is really interesting, is when this unit boosts in the overdress state, all of your front row units get 5,000 power until the end of turn for each armed card on your Vanguard. So this is essentially giving, again, similar to Trick Moon, this is giving 10,000 power to your front row when it boosts, so long as you're double armed, so long as you have a left and a right arm. That's what we're talking about. It's very, very important that you have the double arm ASAP. Now, why am I only running 3 of this and 4 Trick Moon? The reason why is because I did some math, and actually what I found was you don't want your back row to be 3 copies of this in the overdress state. What you want is 2 copies of this in the overdress state and a Trick Moon on rearguard in the final column. What I found is that actually makes bigger numbers on your last attack than just having 3 Veil Lords in the overdress state. You do definitely want a Veil Lord behind Bavsargra, and you want a Veil Lord in the other rearguard spot, but you want the final attack, the final rearguard, to be just Trick Moon. That's a bigger number than if it was Veil Lord. And to mean bigger numbers, we're talking like the 60s. Like, this is insane because you're getting 20k to the front row from these. If you're on a Persona Ride turn, that's 30k to your front row, and then this is a 25k booster. For those not counting at home, regardless of what your front row unit is, this attack is 55. It doesn't even matter what the front row card is. Whatever it is, you're at least 70, if not 75. So, that's an insane number. They have to perfect guard that, or they're dropping a ton of cards from their hand. So this is the ideal setup you want. You want 2 of these, 1 of this, on the rear guard specifically. And that is how you get the most bang for your buck as far as power is concerned, is this setup. So just keep that in mind. That's why we only run 3 Veil Lord, because we're tight on space and you don't want to have a full board of them. Now for the last real normal units, we're kind of teching in the Steel Blaze Dragon Semdil. This is a cool card. And I definitely will run this as long as I can. It's got 2 skills. First is your classic. If your Vanguard is double armed, it's getting 5,000 power. So great skill just for being a 13k beater or booster. So just adding some more good numbers. You'll find sometimes this does end up being a booster, or sorry, you will find sometimes this ends up being a beater just because you want your back row to be these. So sometimes occasionally you'll find that this is in your front row as 13, and that still makes good numbers. So the main reason we're running this is for the second skill, which is second skill says, retire this unit, choose one of an armed card from your drop zone and put it onto your Vanguard armed. So this is just another way to just guarantee we have 2 arms on your Vanguard at all times. It's also a way to just kind of cycle. Like, you can do some fun combos with this and the grade 2 just to arm up the spear specifically multiple times so that you're drawing some more cards, which is nice. And then if you don't have Trick Moon or you already have Trick Moon set up, this is a good target with Bavsargra to just sack it, arm something up from the drop zone, and then Bavsargra just calls it right back. And then we are doing for the perfect guards just your standard lineup I do for every deck profile here, basically. You got your Sanctitude that you can only one copy of. That says if your opponent's Vanguard has the text or skill triple drive, you don't have to discard to pay the perfect guard cost. And then also this is going to the order zone, not the Guardian Circle, so it gets around guard restricts like the Axe, funnily enough. That would say you have to call 2 cards to guard from hand to the Guardian Circle. This isn't going to the Guardian Circle, it's going to the order zone. So it gets around that. And then your 3 Nation perfect guards, if you have 1 or less cards in your hand, you don't have to discard for the perfect guard cost. Don't see that changing anytime soon. Now, trigger lineup is pretty straightforward. I am doing 7 crit as the main crit. Like just adding that pressure with Bavsargra already getting 1 crit. By yourself, why not make it potentially more? We are running the effect crit just because occasionally you do go through a good amount of soul in this deck, and while you do recoup some back, you might be in a situation where looking ahead to the next turn, you're going to be short. So some a little emergency soul charge with the crit can sometimes be nice. And in this deck, the 2k does actually kind of matter depending on your lines because of Veil Lord's boost, especially with your Vanguard. So we do run the 4 for that. And then just 3 of whatever generic crit that you want to run. 7 crit there. And then I'm doing 4 draw triggers just because, like I've said, there's some draw ability, but not a whole lot, and a good amount of it that you do have is really breaking even, not hard plussing. So this deck can have some hand issues, and you do have some pieces that you are relying on here. And while certainly there's ways to search those pieces out, you also need to see those ways to search those pieces. So definitely recommend draws in this deck. Fronts aren't doing a whole lot just because your number lines are crazy as they are. And while 20k shield is definitely nice, I think the draw is better. And then lastly, I am doing for heals your just 4 generic. I know I keep going back and forth on this channel with running the generics versus the effect heals, and it's a meta call. There's just some decks I think 4 generics just goes a long way. You're always going to have the 15k shield regardless of the situation. Just find there are times when the other 2 effect, or I guess other 3 effect heals just aren't doing anything for you, and they're just 10k shields and you could potentially lose because of that. There are certain decks and times where I certainly advocate, and you've seen on this channel I have decks that do have the effect heals, but sometimes I kind of just like having 4 generics. Now, lastly, again, the over trigger, which one are we running? Well, it really shouldn't be a shocker. We're running the Dragon Empire one. Bavsargra gets a crit. I don't think I need to explain any further than that as to why we're running a card that restands our Vanguard when our Vanguard gets a crit till the end of turn. And is huge by herself. So nothing really to say. The Dragon Empire restanding your Vanguard with no minus drives is just a really, really strong over trigger. The blue and red OTs are great, but restanding Bavsargra with a crit and still a twin drive is just too strong to pass up. So definitely Dragon Empire OT. And yeah, that's what we have for Bavsargra. It's a fun little deck. It's kind of still got its little anti-meta circle here. We just keep consistently blowing up people's front rows, including Bastion, like we said, which is cool. I'm not running the mace. Probably should have talked about that during the arms section. The mace is the other new arm card alongside the axe that came out in set 12. But if I'm being blunt, it wasn't very good. So we're not running it. Space in this deck is just so tight. Like, there's so many things you need to run. You have to have your Trick Moons, you have to have your Veil Lords, you have to have the Spear, the Axe, the Shield. There's so many cards you have to be running in this deck that there's just not room for something that's mediocre at best, which is what I consider the mace to be. So, no mace. We'll see what happens in the future. But yeah, another deck with Bavsargra where it's fun. I enjoy playing this deck. It's just a fun kind of unique deck with the arm skills, and there's fun little looping combos, like I said, that you can do, especially with the spear. But while there are those cool like combo tech plays, there's, aside from the spear where you're potentially drawing a few times, there's not a whole lot of payoff for those kind of high level skill plays. So the deck, while still being kind of fun and a little anti-meta here and there, it's really just being brought down by the fact that we didn't get a different Bavsargra. And while she's decent, blowing up the front row is great, getting a crit is great, but where that's all you're doing and there's no like extra attacks, especially in this deck, yeah, it just feels like it's a little lacking. Definitely falls to some of the stronger decks out there. And with, again, the soft reboot-ish coming, I am concerned that we're not really going to see any more for this, but I at least enjoy playing the deck. If you have any questions about it, certainly let me know. Happy to talk about it. And otherwise, you'll be seeing us soon. Bye.